Welcome to your next great novel. I'm your host, Phil Williams, and today I have thriller, science fiction, and fantasy author Kory Shrum on the show. She is a USA Today and international best-selling author of 14 fantastic novels. Welcome to the show, Kory.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your life, and how you became an author?
Well, sure. So I actually studied writing when I was at school. I know some people say that they wanted to be writers since they were children. That wasn't an immediate revelation for me. I did have a cousin who dug up a poem like over Christmas one year that was like, "Look, you've been writing since you were 8," and so that was nice and embarrassing. But mostly, I discovered my love of writing when I was at university, and so I did have an English major with a creative writing minor.
So did you
And
start there or did you start undecided?
I know I started undecided. So I think for a minute I was a theater major. Then I realized I hated to be on stage and I don't know whose idea that was. And so then I went toward biology pre-med and then I went toward psychology. And then I was like, really, I just want to write. And so I kind of gave myself over to it around my sophomore, junior year. So I had done the prereqs, and then I was
Okay,
able to just kind
great.
of easily slide over into the writing thing. Because the whole time I had already been taking English classes because
Okay.
I had enjoyed it so much. But after that, I got an MA in fiction writing and then an MFA in poetry. So that wasn't enough. So then I started teaching writing to college students, and then I went writing full time in 2018 last year. But before that, I actually had published my well, actually, I should even go back even further. So I pursued the traditional publishing route first. In 2009, I finished my first novel, Dying for a Living, and I started shopping around for agents. And I did find an agent in New York, Ginger Clark from Curtis Brown. She was really lovely, but they had a hard time placing the novel because it's outside of genre specifications. And if you know anything about traditional publishing, you'll know that they really like to know where they're going to put a book in a market. It
Yeah,
needs
they
to
want
be
something new and fresh, but like this exactly.
everything. Exactly, but like everything else. So they were trying to figure out where to put this book in the market, and they were having a really hard time because it doesn't fit normal genre conventions. So I decided to self-publish it in 2014, and it wasn't such a difficult transition for me because when I was going to school, I had worked for two small presses at the same time. So at my first university, they had a small press. So my first school was Austin P, which is down in Clarksville, Tennessee, and they had a press, Zone 3. And then also during my MFA, New Issues Press, which I was actually a copy layout editor for. And so I kind of had a sense of what it took to take a book from manuscript form to finished product. And so I wasn't completely bewildered by the idea of publishing the book on my own. And so that's what I ended up doing in 2014. And then now I've got 14 books and I do it full time.
Great. And by the way, for people out there listening, I look through a lot of different authors and I look at their reviews and I do all this to recruit authors to the promotion. Kory's one of the authors that often promotes with us, and the reviews she gets are just fantastic. So she's definitely doing something right as far as the writing goes.
Obsessiveness pays off.
Yeah. So your latest book series, which is Shadows in the Water, can you tell us a little bit about the series, the premise and the plot, without giving the whole story away?
Sure, sure. So the premise is that there is a young woman named Louis Thorne who has a power that in the beginning really terrifies her. So basically, she slips through darkness and water. So that means that if she is submerged in water of any kind, or if she is in a dark room or a very dim room, um, it kind of pulls her through to another place. And so when she was a child, she couldn't really control it. So she had a lot of fear regarding that, this kind of uncontrolled feeling of her body going to different places against her will. But then later she learns to actually use that power to avenge the death of her parents. Her father was a DEA agent and he put away a man from the Italian mafia. And so they did basically a honor killing and tried to kill off her whole family. But her father saves her by throwing her into the pool, knowing that she would disappear and be saved. So then she kind of tries to work through that trauma of losing her father, who she was really close to, who kind of helped her through this terrifying power situation, and uses it then to hunt down and kill the people who murdered her family.
Wow, interesting. So would you classify this as urban fantasy?
Great question. I would say that it's more like a thriller, as far as there's
Okay.
a lot of crime elements. Eventually, in the series, she teams up with Robert King, who was her father's mentor, and he ends up being a private investigator in New Orleans. And so there becomes more like a crime. There's a lot of crime elements that you would recognize in typical thriller novels.
Right.
But her power is, it's unique. It's outside that. So I would say that it's mostly crime thriller, but with the touch of the fantasy given her ability.
We need to create a new genre for you.
Yes. Any suggestions for the supernatural crime thriller? Maybe?
Yes. My books are the same way. I have trouble figuring out where to put different things, but
Yeah, it's a challenge.
But I do think that if you're writing in different genres, which you do, write in quite a few different genres, I think it makes you better as a writer. Now it's difficult for sales, but I think it helps with the craft to learn different genres and put these different elements in your books.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a flexibility to the mind and one's creative process. I think if you're able to take different elements of stories and put them together in a cohesive way, regardless of what the genre might be.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, a lot of times you have readers complain about thriller authors that try to write like a little bit of romance in their novel, and they're like, oh, it's so bad, right?
Yeah, right.
But the romance authors, they know how to write those relationships, and I think it's something that even if you write thrillers, it's something you should probably know how to do if you're going to write a good story.
Right. Right. No, and that's always a challenge because so there is a bit of romance in the Shadow series. Lou ends up kind of developing a connection to the son of the man that she eventually kills. So he is the son of the mob boss, and so they have an uneasy situation. First, she thinks she wants to kill him, and then they form an uneasy alliance. But anyway, so a lot of it really depends on the reader.
Romance trope, by the way.
Right. Well, yeah. So it really depends on who's reading, because I get some people that are like, wow, more Constantine, please, because that's his name. They're like, please, more of him. And the other people are like, just kill him already. so I'm like, well, I guess you can't please everyone.
No,
so some people get really into it, but other ones, they want something else. So it really just depends on your reader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think understanding that you can't please everybody. I don't know. Do you, by the way, do you read your bad reviews ever? Is that something that you look at?
Sometimes. Mostly because I'm
Kory
looking
has very, I can't imagine she has very many bad reviews, but she's got thousands of reviews on Amazon. So I guarantee some of them are bad.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sure like 5%. So of 1,000 reviews, what is 5%? I do words, not math. So
50.
Yeah, so maybe like 50 bad reviews overall out of the 1,000 reviews. But and I do look at them. Some of them are unhelpful. Like, so for example, this is trash.
That's a very kind word.
This is trash, like, or who would pay for this or whatever. And I'm just like, well, that does nothing for me. But some of them, they'll say things that are actually useful to me. So they'll say something like, I didn't feel like this part was really developed, or I wish that there was more of X, Y, or Z in this particular book. And the danger is always if I agree. I'm like, yes, you're right, I did, but I just couldn't figure out how to put that in there, or I just couldn't possibly have stuffed any more into this book. So it's more like if I do like to read the bad reviews, but only the helpful ones, like the one where there was something there that I can take something away from it and then put it into the next book, or
Right.
have that in my mind as I'm working forward. So I don't shy away from criticism. That's probably due to the years of training as a writer at school, which is where you always get into workshops and people tear your stuff apart and they're looking you in the eye when they do it. So you have to be very bold. Like you develop like a hard. It's not like on the internet where someone's like, this is garbage. Like there is someone who maybe you had lunch with sitting across from you being like, I just don't understand why you wrote it. Like,
wow.
Like the workshop environment and an academic setting can be brutal. So you're
tougher than me, because I used to read them all. And then one day I just said, I'm not reading them anymore. It's because I actually go through and thank all the people that write me 5-star reviews. I just put a little thing. If they reference something or ask a question in their review, I'll answer it. Or most of the time I'm just like, hey, thank you for reading and appreciate the review, that type of thing. Because I just figure that if they take the time to read through my book and then go through the trouble of writing a nice review, the least I can do is go and kind of thank them. And I know that sort of violates the you're not supposed to comment type thing, but I don't comment on the bad ones, obviously. But I would see all the 1 stars when I would go to do this. So now what I do is I click the 5 stars so it filters them so I don't even see them anymore. Like it will ruin my day for like the next day or two, and I'm like, I'm not even reading them anymore. But
Right. It might help you to think about whatever book you think is the most amazing book of your life. Maybe not one that you've written, but like Harry Potter or something, like whatever someone would be really into. If you go to that book page, you will see that there are 1-star bad reviews. So it's like you can't be like expecting not to get some you're going to get some negativity from someone, some more than others, right? I'm sure that there's more trash talk written on Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series than Harry Potter's, for example, but someone's going to say stuff about your work regardless of how well it is or isn't written. So that just kind of comes with it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I just like I have 2 editors and I get a lot of professional and my structural editor, I think she's really like, and she even says she's really harsh with my work because we've been doing this for 14 books now. So she's like, when I send you something back, I'm not telling you how great you are. I'm just gonna be really harsh, and then I get my copy editor also does a good job of sort of telling me different things, and I try to learn from what they say. And I feel like it's coming from them. It doesn't bother me because look, I'm paying for them to tell me what's wrong with these things. And,
right. Come at me. Come on.
Right. Exactly. But it's like when I get these random people, I just think it just sends me into this funk that I just want to try to avoid. And sometimes it's hard to, for me anyway, like you said, you're tougher than me, but for me, sometimes it's hard to sit down and write all day when you feel like, what you're doing isn't necessarily good. And that is totally irrational because it's coming from some crazy person on the internet or maybe some sane person on the internet, but books are so subjective. My wife told me one time, she was like, books are kind of like music. I don't like country music. That doesn't mean that Garth Brooks is a terrible musician. Right.
Exactly.
So, and that's a good way of looking at it.
Right. Well, my first thought was Garth Brooks is an amazing magician, and I don't listen to country at all, but he's a really great performer. But yes, absolutely. You can't take it to heart. But the thing is that sometimes you will anyway. So even though we keep making jokes about how battle hardened I am or whatnot, there will still be some things that it'll just land in such a way that I'm like, ouch.
Right.
Ow. Like, I'm just going to go stand over here and sulk for a minute and then like maybe eat some chocolate or ice cream straight from the pint from the fridge and then go back to work. Like it just happens to everyone. So it comes with the territory.
Yeah. For me, it just wasn't productive.
I think it's about mindset. So it makes me think of, for example, something I'm consciously working on now is being a better public speaker, because public speaking is terrifying for most people, to go up and speak to strangers in a room. So I'll tape myself when I do a speech of any kind, and there's such a resistance to watching the tape later. So when I think about like watching myself give the speech, like my skin starts to crawl and I'm like, can I do anything but watch myself do this? But I really want to improve, and so I'm like, okay, I won't know what to work on if I don't look at this head on. So I'm not convincing you to read your bad reviews, because sometimes it is really toxic, but at the same time, if you just think about what you want to work on, sometimes you just have to go in headstrong and be like, okay, I'm going to look at this because I want to get better. But again, if it's not productive, I mean, there's no need to punish yourself unnecessarily.
Right. Well, I think it could be productive, but I think for me, the damage outweighs the reward, so to speak. But well,
and then absolutely stay off your review page then.
Right.
And that's something you got to make a call for yourself. Yeah, absolutely. So
you were talking about being a better public speaker, and that's one thing I've really noticed having to edit this podcast. So because I go back through and take out the ums and the ahs and oh my gosh, I didn't realize how bad of a public speaker I am until going through and editing my own podcast and hearing my voice and saying, oh my God, I can't believe do I really say that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, not you. Like, yes,
Yes,
Billy,
I do. I do say that. I do say,
but I mean,
I do say,
that's everyone's problem. Yeah, for sure.
It's so brutal.
It's a challenge. And if you have nerves, if you're nervous, it just makes it worse because it's harder to stay calm. So if you were
Right.
perfectly calm about it, you could probably just catch yourself from saying, you could just
Right.
wait, have a nice leisurely
Right.
pause, and then just don't let it come out of your mouth. But if you're all worked up, you come up and be like, hey, how you doing?
Right. But sometimes it's hard to have a silence, right?
Yeah.
So if
Well, you
I'm
can edit the silent sound. It's fine.
right, but it feels, yeah, you can totally edit silence is really easy, but when you're talking, the silence feels weird, so your brain fills in the silence with nonsense. So,
Right. Absolutely.
nonsense of ums and ahs. Oh,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
You brought an excerpt to share from Carnival, which is the latest in the Shadows series.
I did.
Great, fantastic. So, are we ready to read that?
Yes. So I
Okay.
can read that to you. There's just a small preface to it is that, so what's happening is that Lou is stalking a serial killer named Jeffrey Fish. So if you
Okay.
hear me say Fish, I'm talking about a person because she often refers to him by his last name. So if
Okay.
you're just like, who is this Fish? Like, why does she just keep saying Fish? It
Good
would
to
be
know.
really bizarre if you didn't know. So she's stalking a serial killer named Fish.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah, ready.
Okay. Lou regarded the house across the street. It was a farmhouse in a cul-de-sac with two big picture windows punched in front. This configuration gave Lou the impression of a worried face. The light was on, illuminating a covered porch and the swing hanging to the left of a turquoise door. The paint looked fresh, even if the rest of the house sagged. After 10 minutes, Lou checked her internal compass, but there was no pull. No inner wisdom saying she'd gotten it wrong, that she was needed somewhere else. Not that she couldn't imagine all manner of ambushes. Maybe Fish had decided to rear in the girl. He'd pretend to be concerned and apologetic before dragging her off the shoulder into the woods. Headlights appeared at the end of the road, and Lou's patience was rewarded. The blue Honda swung into the paved driveway and didn't have any dents. The young brunette climbing from the driver's side looked unharmed, if tired from her day. She was already inside the house when the SUV rolled up and parked on the opposite side of the street. Lou sighed, mere feet from her hiding place beneath the tree. I'm right about him. I know what he is. That means he's fair game, she thought. She could slip into the dark of his car, wrap her hands around his throat and pull him, well, anywhere. She'd take him to her dumping ground, to the lake half frozen with winter, a place of endless night. She would put a bullet between his eyes and watch the light click off. Or maybe she would play with him first. Maybe she would let him fight her just so that she could enjoy breaking him. When it was over, and Jeffrey Fish could no longer prey on the women of this world, she would drag his body into the water and... No, Louis. It was King's words in her head. The bothersome private detective had somehow become one of the four voices that polluted her mind, and it rose, principled and insistent, even now. We're playing a different game this time, he had said. This game has rules. Louis sighed, her breath fogging in front of her face. They were playing a different game, all right, and Lou wanted to know how much time they had left on the clock. How long could Fish go before he had to kill? Once Lou herself had taken nearly 2 months off of killing and had nearly killed her. She hadn't been able to sleep. She'd eaten only when necessary. She'd used her body like a punching bag, offering herself up to any half-cocked asshole stupid enough to take a swing. Was Fish's hunger the same? Did it make his skin itch the way Lou's did sometimes? Did it feel like cold fingers sliding into his skull, obliterating all thought, replacing all rationality with a single, desperate need? Did it prevent him from sleeping or sitting still? Did it make him reach for a gun just to hold it as he paced the floor? Or was that only her? His charade of normalcy worked well enough. Hadn't that been her first thought when she'd seen him in the Huntington Park playground? His son had been swinging on the monkey bars while Fish had pretended to read a novel. He'd turned the pages after the appropriate pauses. He'd kept his head tilted down as if carefully regarding the page. He'd presented himself as the picture of suburban acceptability in his pressed dress shirt and khakis. He had clean fingernails and a washed, shaven face. The mothers watching their children had regarded him with mild interest. No suspicion had creased their faces. One had asked him about the book. How well you disguise yourself, Mr. Fish, Lou had thought, knowing he couldn't have seen the words on the page. And what was he thinking now, as he sat in his dark car, watching the house? What was he feeling, deciding? Inside the house, an upstairs bedroom light clicked on, illuminating a white closet door in the foot of a bed. The girl was in pajamas now, her hair pulled back off her face. It was red and shining, freshly scrubbed. She wore glasses. She bent to plug in her phone, connecting the charger to the small device. The light clicked off. The driver's side door of the SUV opened, and Lou dropped into a crouch. Two shining leather shoes stepped out onto the street, the heels ground into the pavement. She slipped from the side of the tree to get a better view. Jeffrey was halfway across the street, standing in the moonlight. His shirt shone, wrapping himself in a spectral glow. His chest was visibly heaving as he stared up at the dark window. His fists were clenched at his sides. The shirt fluttered in a light breeze. No, she realized. He was trembling. Go in, Lou begged silently. Go in and try something. Come on. Her palms itched. She licked her lips, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. It was as if she was watching her hunger grow in proportion to his. With a grimace, Fish grabbed a fistful of his hair and pulled as if yanking his whole body back to the car. He grunted, changed course, threw himself behind the wheel. The door slammed. The SUV hooked a U-turn in the dark street. The tires squealed. Lou watched the vehicle go, the taillights like hungry eyes in retreat. The bedroom light clicked on again, showing the young woman framed in the backlit window. She was also watching the taillights fade into the distance. This is a different game, King had said. A game that Lou hoped didn't get this woman killed. That's it.
Oh, that's
Begin.
fantastic.
Story by me.
I was afraid for her. I figured she was done.
Well, that's the whole point of the book, is whether or not he's going to end up getting this girl. Because the premise is that this whole time Lou's sort of killed without thought or regard to the justice system. So if there was someone that she wanted dead, she would simply just, attack them.
So this would be vigilante justice.
Right. But now King has sort of convinced her that they shouldn't just disappear, that they should try to convict these men if possible so that the families can get closure. Mm-hmm. So this is the victim that he's hunting now, but Fish has already killed other women. So they're basically trying to lay a trap for him to get him arrested. But, it's hard for Lou because she's just like, I don't have time for this. let's just kill this guy.
Right. Well, you should definitely read your own books, because that was your narrator voice is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. That excerpt, is there something that is personally significant to you regarding either that excerpt or the Shadows in the Water series, or Carnival in particular?
I don't know about Carnival in particular, but for the Shadows in the Water series, I think I tend, and maybe it's not unique to Shadows in the Water, maybe you see it in other places if I think about it, but for me, I do like to write about women in interesting power situations. So either they're they have been made to feel powerless or helpless at some point, and then they reclaim that in some way, or they're afraid of their power in the beginning, kind of, which is Lou's situation, which is where she has these amazing gifts, but in the beginning, when they feel uncontrollable, she's almost ruined by them because she just feels so out of control and so helpless and overwhelmed by them. But then she learns how to harness them and use them. So for me, a lot of the journeys that the women take in my stories are definitely power journeys of some kind. Either they started with power or they got it over time. So I think that's part of Lou's story for sure, is figuring out
Or
her
power's been
gifts.
taken from them?
Yeah, or power's been taken from them. So figuring out how to move forward from that. So Lou suffered a terrible loss when she was a child. So she was already dealing with her power issues, but her father was sort of her anchor. And so then when he's killed, basically almost in front of her, she's in the water when he's being killed. But it basically happens in front of her eyes, and so she's really traumatized by that, and so she has to work through that and through the novels as well. And she has a lot of anger, and she takes it out rather violently on other people. And so she's, I'm only writing the fifth one now, so we've only gotten so far, but she is learning, you can tell, to harness her anger in more productive ways, and to help not just alleviate her own pain and suffering, but the pain of others. So it's going to take her a minute, I think, to get there.
Well, I could picture the whole scene. I mean, I really like the vividness of the writing. I could picture the freshly washed face, the lights clicking on and off, and
well, my job here's done.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the idea.
So, what's been your biggest struggle or setback as an author?
I would probably say balance. Balance in a lot of different ways. Balance between work life and home life. I can be a little obsessive when I'm trying to get things done, and so I will, work through lunch and not realize I had skipped lunch, or I will, still be working at 11 or 12 or midnight and be like, oh gosh, time to go to bed. Like, you need to go to sleep. So there's definitely some balance issues. And then also between writing and marketing, writing enough that I feel like I'm making progress, but not so much that I get burned out. And then the same with marketing. So overall, I would say balance.
Right.
Doing just the right amount of everything, taking care of myself and getting the writing done. Yeah.
You're essentially running your own business and running a publishing company, and being creative and having to do the business side. Do you find that that's difficult to turn one side of your brain on and off like that?
It can be, to shift, right? When you're doing one task, your mind can be in an immersive mode, and then if you try to switch to something else too quickly, sometimes there's some resistance. But I do find that batching helps if you put similar tasks together. And then also just kind of knowing what I want to do ahead of time helps me to slip into that mindset more quickly.
Right.
Because if I have to think about, like, what am I going to do next, then that's just like me standing there, and the next thing I know, I'm having like some kind of full-blown daydream about like something else that's totally unrelated. And I'm like, what was I standing here trying to do? Oh, that's right. Because the writer's mind just goes everywhere it wants to all the time. I don't know if that's your problem.
You have that side of you that's the very creative author, but then at the same time, you have to be the businesswoman.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
And I don't know that that's particularly easy for a lot of authors. It used to be that you could be a creative and you'd get an agent and they would handle all the marketing and business aspects for the most part, and you would just be the
sit
creative.
back and write.
Right.
Yeah.
And those contracts are few and far between these days.
Oh yeah, it's definitely changed. I have several friends who followed the traditional publishing route, and they are expected to do a lot of the marketing now for themselves, which maybe wasn't true 10, 20, 30 years ago for writers and creatives.
Or they won't even sign you unless you have a platform already with
absolutely,
with an audience already. I've seen some where the writing may or may not necessarily be quote unquote good. I mean, I know it's very subjective, but if you've got the audience, I don't think they care.
Right.
Right. I mean, if I come in with, I've got 1 million people that'll buy my book, I don't think that they're going to come back to me and say, well, it doesn't quite fit our standards for blah, blah, blah. That's not what they're going to say.
They're gonna be like, how many copies sold?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
exactly.
It's like, you
When
have
can
a
we take your
million
money?
Instagram followers? Okay,
Yeah,
that's probably like at least 500,000 sales. You're signed.
right.
Yeah. That's
Exactly.
happened a lot with Instagram poets lately, actually. Are you familiar with Rupi Kaur or
No, but I have heard of this phenomenon, which I think is great. I mean, if because
Oh
poetry is
yeah.
such a difficult thing to monetize, it's great that
Oh, for sure.
they're finding a way to make money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are over 30 million. I looked this up this morning, by the way. There are over 30 million books for sale on Amazon.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like I don't look up those numbers specifically for that
So,
reason.
so in this little pause, there was probably 10,000 more that just happened.
Great.
and and I estimate, and I'm not 100% sure on this
I mean,
number.
I'm just kidding. Great. Like
Yeah,
I want people to get their work out there
exactly.
to harness their voices for sure.
Just stay out of my genre. No, I'm just
Just yeah,
kidding.
just write a nice romance or something, would you guys?
So, and I'm not 100% sure about this number, but I estimate that there's at least a million authors, and of course that's growing each day. How do you differentiate yourself in this crowded sea of authors that we have today?
Probably the thing that makes me most different, I would say, would be the approach to genre because I don't fit neatly anywhere. So I think a lot of the books on the market, the authors are trying to write to market, or they're trying to make their books really clearly defined as far as genres is concerned, so that they can more easily place the titles. What else? But for me, it's like with Louis, for example, it's a crime thriller, but not really. And then in the Dying for a Living series, it's a quirky contemporary fantasy kind of young woman PI thing, but not really because she has the ability to die and come back to life. So does that make it zombie fiction? No, not really, because no one's eating brains. And
Right.
then she starts hallucinating and seeing angels. So does that make it paranormal? Well, not exactly. So it's like it doesn't really fit neatly anywhere. So
Have
yeah,
you
so
found
I
have you
that's
found that that
different.
makes it more difficult as far as your marketing efforts goes? If you
It
can't,
does. It can be a challenge because I think of it as like Venn diagramming. So for example, to be fair, there are not I'm not the only writer out there who's doing like supernatural crime thriller. So for example, Stephen King's Mr. Mercedes series, that is a crime thriller. Are you familiar with the series?
no, I'm not.
Oh, it's great. I love that book. But anyway, so there's a trilogy. Mr. Mercedes was the first one. Finders Keepers was the second one, and the third one was End of Watch. But basically, it follows this detective who uh, is hunting this guy, Robert. Is it Brady? Something I've forgotten the killer's name. But it starts off with the first book being very much a crime thriller. So there's a cop in pursuit of someone who wants to bomb a. I think it was a. I don't want to give anything away. So a bomb. But then by the second or third book, this guy has like powers because when they confronted him in the first one, he kind of okay, see, I'm still trying not to give away plot in case anyone wants to read this. But anyway, by the third book, he's got powers. Okay. This killer has powers. And so it goes from a pretty solid crime thriller to some supernatural elements, right?
Right.
And so and I think Dean Koontz does that as well with some of his work. What the Midnight Knows. I think that there was a man who was executed like a horrible killer of some kind, and then once he was dead, he started possessing other people and like using their bodies to kill other people. So again, it's a crime thriller, but not really because there's this demon possession element. So it's not unique, but Stephen King and Dean Koontz are such wide audiences. He also wrote The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon, which is like a kid lost in a wood story. So it's like you really have to really think about targeting. So there's no clean fits even for people that are similar to what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
Because
sense.
they have such a large catalog. Like Dean Koontz has such a huge catalog. Stephen King has such a huge catalog. I can't just be like, if you like Stephen King, you'll like me. Because what if you only liked
It.
Shawshank Redemption or something?
Right.
Like or right, exactly. Or his really clearly horror, like his old horror novels. Like that's not exactly it
Like
either. So
Carrie or Cujo or
exactly. So it's a tough it is a tough match, but if you find some overlap, like if you like Stephen King and maybe someone else that has similar elements, then you can find the readers in the middle of your Venn diagram
Right.
that would like both. So then they probably are more closely matched to you.
Right. But your targeting is not as easy as somebody who's like,
No, exactly.
I
It's
write
not as
cozy mysteries.
yes, exactly. You want a woman with a dog
Yeah,
who
right.
solves a murder.
Definitely dog, because if it's a cat, you don't sell as many.
Right. I heard that as well. That's so strange. So strange. But yes, I heard that too, that people prefer dogs. So I
Yes.
mean, I have a dog, so I guess I can't really say anything. I'm that person, but
Yeah, cats are funny. I mean, I actually had both cats and dogs growing up, and sometimes cats can be so nice and so wonderful, and then you get other ones that it can be really angry and not so nice.
yeah, I was actually talking to someone the other day. She's like, I got a dog because they said he would be so loving, affectionate, and he will have nothing to do with me. So then I got two cats, and they're the most affectionate creatures in the world. She was like, what happened here? She's like, did I buy the wrong one? Of which kind? She's like, what was this? So she got the reverse. So her cats are real affectionate,
That's
and her
funny.
dog is like, leave me alone, please.
That's funny. We actually had a stray here. We don't have any pets, but we have stray cats all over the property, and I feed them sometimes, but keep the mice population down. But we had
Mhm.
one that was so nice, and it like came into our house, like ran in. I didn't mean to let her in. She ran in, didn't
Mhm.
want to leave, and I felt so bad for putting her out. But
No.
Denise is my wife. She's allergic, so that's why we don't have the cats. But she wants a dog. She's not allergic to dogs. She wants a dog, but that would involve her petting and enjoying the dog, and me doing all the work. So so we
And and you're not ready for that
yeah, I told
setup.
her, I said I have enough chores. We've got chickens here. We have bees, and I have enough chores already. I don't need
Right. You're like, I don't also want to raise a dog and train it. Thanks.
yeah, exactly. One thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about the genres and authors writing in genres that don't necessarily fit. I always wonder if you end up with, for example, let's say you read a lot of crime fiction and then you become a crime fiction author. How many of these authors that write in those genres are their stories end up being amalgamations of like everything that they've ever written, and how much of it becomes kind of derivative and not anything that's really new and fresh, and maybe something that really has to do with that's coming deep from within them versus something that's just being recycled from a bunch of other people. So I don't know the answer to that, but I often wonder because I think if you recycle from other people and you have this sort of amalgamation of everything you've ever read, and I think you could probably be very successful doing that, but I don't know if you're writing anything that's really unique, because I think everybody, even though there's a million authors out there, everybody is their own person, and there's unique things to them that if they put those things in their writing, I think it's just much more real to me.
Right. Well, I absolutely think that what you read, it matters what you read. And if you were only reading one genre, maybe it would become, there'd be like a saturation point where everything that was coming out was basically just a similar
Right.
kind of story. And maybe that's what's happening with my stuff because I don't read just one genre. I read a lot, like across all, there's just about any genre I read it. I think the only thing I don't read is like Western space operas or something.
I don't read that
Like
genre either.
like really fringe stuff. Then like I won't
Right.
pick it up but most any book I'm just like I will evaluate it based on or enjoy it based on what it evaluating sounded so clinical. I will tell you what if this
Right.
is good or not
Hey,
based
wait,
on
that's what you used to do.
right. It is yes actually yes I used to be paid when I was a university writing instructor. I used to be
That's right.
paid to tell people about the writing, but based on just the story itself. So I'm not real picky on genre. So I wonder if that's why a lot of my stuff is so genre flexible because I read across a lot of different genres. And then if I just feel like a story needs something, I just
Right.
like we'll just put this in here. Like it doesn't really matter that it's breaking genre convention. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does matter what you're reading and what's going in. Because if I go in a really long nonfiction streak, which sometimes I do, I'll find it's really hard to find that fiction narrative in my head when I sit down to write. So there's got to be a connection between what
Right.
you're reading and what you sit down to write for sure.
Absolutely. And if you're writing, we talked about this before the show. By the way, we had a show before the show. We talked for like 40 minutes, and we had a lot of really great stuff to say, but you're not going to hear it. So,
That sounds so exclusive. Well, we had a better interview before
right.
this one, so
That's
sorry guys. We used all our best material, then showed up.
Exactly. But yeah, we talked about, for example, I was talking about a thriller author that they try to plug in like a romance subgenre into the book, and a lot of times readers complain, "Oh, it's just so terrible," and blah blah blah. But if you're somebody who's not used to writing romance, it's maybe you're not necessarily good at writing these relationships, and then you try to plug it in to your thriller novel, and it's not necessarily a good thing. But if you're reading all these different genres, I think you have a much better shot of having these multi-genre books and having the different elements work.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, should I take the counterpoint just to
sure.
make it more interesting?
That was a terrible idea. No, you should just stick with one genre, and you got to learn it, know all the tropes, and if you veer off, we will come with a ruler and smack your hand.
Right. I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of writers, I think especially independent writers, who might have that perspective because they're thinking about it from the marketing lens, but it is easier to write in a genre and know the top authors in that genre, and then to put your book in that stream. But I come from the position of creativity first. Like, it should be the story first, and then work out the marketing stuff later. Because if someone really loves your stories, I think they'll forgive you if you happen to not be like anyone else. And maybe that's really why they like you. I mean, I get a lot of really sweet letters from fans. I was talking to someone else the other day, and they're like, "How much email do you get?" I was like, "Oh, about 500 to 800 letters a month." And they were like, "What?" And I was like, "Well, I tell them to respond to my newsletter." And they're like, "Why would you do that?" But anyway, I get these really sweet responses in which they're like, "Oh, I love your stuff so much. You have such a unique style. Like, it's so vivid, but it's also, it's not like other stuff that I'm reading." And so I find that very encouraging. I'm like, okay, good. That means I'm still putting the story first, which is what's important to me personally.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. On the flip side, I've heard of authors will literally write the advertisement before they write the actual book. So
yeah.
And that's been successful for some, and they've been able to market the book and make a fortune. But for me, I'm like you. I'll write what I'm passionate about at the moment, and I'll try to write the absolute best story I can. And at the end of it, if it's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to sell it, then I don't know if that's always the best strategy for sales, but for me, it's about the story first, and worry about where it fits, and who's going to read it, and whether I can sell it later. But I have some books. I have literary fiction. I have a romance. I have thrillers. I have political thrillers. I have YA. I mean, I'm all over the place.
Yeah.
And
now you need to write a book that is all of that in one book. And that's how you know you've stepped up. Yeah, right. You've stepped up your game.
Exactly.
A literary, romantic thriller.
Right. Well, I'm stepping into science fiction now. The one I'm working on now.
But sci-fi.
Yeah, the title of the series is 2050, so that gives you the time frame. Now, it's not like...
That's so interesting.
It's not like...
Because I'm writing one. I'm going to tell you this now so you don't come back later and say I stole this from you. But I'm also writing a series, and the title's not 2050, but the series title is 2603. So if you're like, Kory stole my numbers, I did not. I have a cover already with this number.
Well, it'll be perfect for us to cross-promote then.
Yeah, so it's also set in the future, for sure.
2603 is 2050 is like, okay, that's 30 years from now, right? Mm-hmm. I can kind of wrap my head around, because you can kind of figure out what is likely to be here in 2050 by finding out what people are working on now, and some of the stuff that's already available but not widely available. Like, for example, self-driving cars. I mean, that stuff that stuff is coming, and that it's not a stretch for me to have that in a book in 2050, but I have no idea what it's going to be like in 2600. Like, I can't wrap my head around that. So,
well, let me tell you, it'll be around the 2600. No, the reason why I was able to choose that year and to feel pretty confident about, I mean, not because I actually think it's going to be accurate, but the reason why I felt confident writing the world like I did, even though it was so far in the future, is because I listened to this on audiobook, a really great autobiography about Leonardo Da Vinci. I think it was done by Walter Isaacson. I don't remember the exact title of the autobiography. It's about Da Vinci, and anyway, so that was however many, it's like 500-600 years in the past. And when I was listening to the audiobook, I mean, yeah, so when I'm listening to the story, I'm like, these are the things that haven't changed. So there are a lot of things about the past that seem like, oh, this place was like ancient, but really they already had a lot of things that we have now. They just either weren't mainstream, or they were more like fringe ideas rather than accepted all around attitude or perspective.
Right.
So I was like, well, what if I just fast forwarded that much change into the future and then build in this idea? So my world is set in a post climate change world. So it's also the idea that a lot of things have been lost because we had to course correct, right? So it wouldn't progress as quickly as you would think, because there was basically like a long time where it was like complete collapse and they had to basically reconfigure society. And so even though it does read absolutely like a futuristic sci-fi, like it will seem ahead. It's not so implausible that you would read it and be like, no, this would never. It's like you're like, oh, I could see why they would do it like this, and I could see why this would be a necessity, and these are the things that have not changed, and these are the things that have. And
that's such
so,
a
for
fun.
Example,
I was going to ask you for some examples.
Well, for example, immigration is a huge issue in the U.S. right now, and so what does that look like in a post-climate change world where the outer fringes of the U.S. are basically uninhabitable due to storm surges and whatever? So everyone has moved inland, and they've built these zones. So they have all these security, basically biosealed buildings, biosealed zones. Like, if for you to be a citizen in a zone, like what does the immigration look like, that kind of thing. So this idea of kind of xenophobia hasn't really changed, but what does that look like in 2603 when this idea of resource scarcity is so how do they regulate how much everyone gets and how does everyone live? And so there are things that haven't changed, unfortunately, not to sound too like depressing, but but there are some things that where the technology is definitely ahead, but not necessarily the mentality of everyone.
Right. A lot of the political ideologies are recycled over and over again too, which is
Yeah,
scary.
for sure.
It's like we forget what it's like to live in a totalitarian government. It's like, okay, well,
So let's redo it.
let's redo it and try it and see. Maybe it'll work better this time.
Like, no.
It's like, but we keep, and I don't think it's necessarily people, but I think it's the nature of government in of itself is the government is for itself, essentially gaining, consistently gaining more and more power by enacting more and more rules and, taking more and more liberties from people. And eventually you end up with totalitarian government that is essentially out for itself, and anybody has something bad to say about it, then it'll makes you go away. I mean, that's throughout history. That's kind of the arc for powerful governments. They either collapse under the weight of their own ineptitude, or they continue to grow and grow in power and control over the people, which is frightening. But
right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they have that saying, history repeats itself. So
what do you think has been the most controversial book you've ever written, and why? And you can include what you're working on if you think that this will probably contain more controversial ideas.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm like, whoa, my mind just like exploded. So I have two options. It is either what I'm working on now, either the new series, the sci-fi series, or it would be my Castle Cove series, because just because of the format. I don't know many other people who are writing adult split path novels, meaning that you choose the direction of the story. They were like the choose your own adventure stories that a lot of us read as children, but you can't use choose your own adventure because that's a trademarked copywritten term. So I'm not saying that this is a choose your own adventure story.
We
but
did say that earlier, and we did not give them.
Well, I wasn't being recorded, so so there you go. But so you do read part of the story and then you decide where it goes next. But it's set in a town where vampires, werewolves, and all of that is real. So I mean that would be interesting, and maybe also because it's not just there's some sex, and it's not just heterosexual sex. Basically, any choice you make, you could end up with anyone, anywhere, at any time. So, I mean, that's pretty like racy for most people, I think.
By the way, I read Castle Cove, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it. So.
I'm actually thinking more about Night Tide, the second one, which is where you end up. I don't remember how many options you get for racy sex in the first one, but in the second one,
I don't think I
sure.
got every path, but I didn't. I don't remember there being racy sex scenes or whatever.
Yeah, so I don't think it's as pronounced in the first one, but in Night Tide, for sure, by then it's been happening. But then the new series, the 2603 novels, the first one that's going to come out is called The City Below. And it's essentially, the lead character's name is Grace. She is the co-commander of her zone. So she lives in a place called Zone 2, which is a pretty prosperous zone. It's in the centermost part of the country, so they don't deal with much climate change issues. They're pretty safe where they are, and everyone's pretty well off there. And her job is to basically protect the zone from cyber attackers or anyone who would try to compromise the safety of the zone. And so, but the problem is that she is dealing with the fact that she just lost her husband and son. So the book opens where it's her first day back to work after having left the hospital I can't remember how long she was in the hospital, but basically she stopped an IED explosion that killed her husband and son. And she thinks the IED was meant for her. So she's blaming herself for their deaths. And so she's trying to get through life when she's having a really hard time. Like she's outside, she's, a business, very straightforward, action-oriented woman. But inside, she's a mess. She is trying to deal with having lost basically the only people that matter to her. And she uncovers these truths about her zone that also makes it really hard for her to kind of move forward, and truths about her husband before he died. So that's kind of the first series. So I would say that it's controversial in the fact that I basically plant I'm not going to say who it is, but you're going to guess. I talk about a certain large conglomerate on shopping merchant online who we all know as the bad guy who does these things that like ruins some stuff in the zone, and she has to take them down. So
Nice.
no names, but
Of course.
but they're kind of the bad guy, or part of the bad guy in the first book, right? So yeah, so that would be pretty controversial, and hopefully I won't be sued or like take it on. I didn't use any names or anything in the book. I wasn't like, this is basically this company. But but basically like they're doing some shady things with their employees and stuff. And so anyway, so it's that might be controversial. We'll see where I am in 4 or 5 years.
Well, what's interesting is there's so many political issues that you can tap into just about any. It doesn't matter if it takes place in 2600 or today or whenever. There's just so many of these political issues that are important to both sides of these issues, and a lot of times they only portray both sides in the media, but there's multiple facets to it that are not shown, that I think if you do it in a way that's factual and understanding of the different points of view, I think it can be very good fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, and basically the theme of this book would be what happens when corporations have too much power.
Right.
Like if immigration and stuff is tied to these corporations vouching for you and agreeing to pay your living expenses and ecological costs in a post-climate change world, like what does that look like if they abuse that power? Because that's basically the premise of the first book.
Wow, it sounds really interesting. I'm definitely going to read that when it comes out. So I'll have to.
Well, thank you. I'll let you know.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know. Now, did you do a lot of climate change type research, or?
I do. It is something that I care a lot about, and I do read a lot about it unintentionally. You know how sometimes our eyes are just drawn to certain articles or things. So I do a lot of unofficial research where I've just been following the issue. I read a lot of published papers. You can access a lot of things, not just on the public internet, which you would get through Google and stuff, but through what you would call the private internet as well. Like you can find out what scientists and things are saying about the issues. And for example, there was not a manifesto, that's not the right word, but there was a publication by the U.S. government back in 2000 and I don't remember what year, but it was basically stating how climate change was the biggest threat to our national security. And that was way back, I think, in like George W. Bush's time. And so like if you read something like that, you can kind of get a sense of, from the perspective of like how I wanted to write about it, so like from a social structure, political government perspective of someone who is within the system, because Grace is, someone who tries to uphold the safety of these people, like what would be the challenges and things like that. So yeah, I did do a lot of research, not intentionally, but just because I have interest in it. And so all those ideas have been in there. And then also really cool technologies that people are inventing. I really like to read about technology and like AI and things that
Yeah,
are on
the
the
AI
horizon.
stuff is interesting.
Yeah, so I just find that stuff fascinating. I'm like, so
Where's it going to
where's it
go?
gonna go? Yeah. Did you hear about so there was a company who was gonna make robots for, well, they don't really tell you what they're gonna make the robots for, but they said it was to take care of old people. I mean, that's what the premise is, but people are like, maybe that's a lie. But anyway, they were asking people for their faces. So you could submit your face like an application, and if they liked your face, they would license your face for these robots.
Interesting.
And yeah, and I totally sent in my face, just so you know. I'm that person.
Nice. You have, I'm looking at
I
your
was like,
picture right here. You have a kind face. I could see it.
oh yeah, and I was like, I would love to see my face on a million robots, just because that's like, not because I think that that's well, actually, someone made the joke of, well, if you killed anybody, you would have probable cause. You could be like, how do you know it was me? How do you know it wasn't one of these
That's
1 million robots? But
especially
but
when
just
they
the
have all
idea
the
that,
facial recognition cameras everywhere.
yeah, and I'd be like, well, how do you know it was me? How do you know it wasn't one of these robots? But just this idea that the sci-fi stuff I think is really interesting and fascinating, and it suits my mind. I'm a INTJ personality type. I don't know if you prescribe to Myers-Briggs at all, but
I've never
that's
taken the test, so I'm not sure where I fit. I'm definitely an introverted person, though, so
right.
I don't know beyond that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the T is the thinker, so they like to think about future scenarios and things like that. So I find that stuff very interesting.
I probably am researching similar things. Granted, it's near future, but some of the stuff like the species loss is pretty. That stuff is pretty frightening and
Yeah.
real. The other thing I found that I thought was really interesting is like the number one export by the United States by weight is topsoil. It's topsoil blowing off the farms in the Midwest and running down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico. So the farming practices, as much as it's great that we're able to feed so many people, they're also not sustainable, which is
Hmm.
which is kind of scary. Like we got to figure it out. We're running out of topsoil. We started with this.
Well, I have a solution in my 2603 book.
Okay, great. We're all good then.
I basically was like vertical farms. Vertical farms are the future because you can do, so just imagine like a giant skyscraper where they're just filled with these labs where there's a plant in each individual thing, and it's all monitored by computers, and they can micro adjust. So if the plant needs anything, if there's something wrong, they can fix just that one plant instead of trying to do the whole field. And it's out in the environment, and it's subjected to these so many elements and so many different aspects of just being out in the wild, right? Like you can't control anything about that, but you could perfect it within an indoor setting in a huge building. And vertical farms, again, that's not something that I made up. Like that exists already.
Right.
So it's just getting it to the mainstream.
Like most authors, I'm assuming you do a ton of reading. I know you've reading all the different genres except for
I do,
Western,
yeah.
except for Western something. Western.
Western space opera.
Yeah, right. You don't read in that, but
Yeah, because I don't even know what would be in that. I know it exists because I've heard of it, but I'm like, I have never come
well,
across
what
it.
about Westworld? Would that count?
I
Not
haven't seen
really.
Westworld, but I've heard that it's good.
You
I've heard it's
should
really
you should
good.
watch it. Basically, rich people go to this Western setting theme park, and all the actors there are essentially robots, but they look just like people, and it's kind of a no holds barred. I mean, they could shoot and kill them. I mean, it's kind of like this
Oh gosh,
this creepy playground for rich people. And my,
that
my
is
wife Denise
disturbing.
is like, I'm done. I can't watch this anymore. she's like,
Oh,
she's like, if you're gonna watch this, you can watch it on your own. I just can't believe people would act like that. But I think it's fascinating. But of course,
right.
I'm writing a book about that has some of these elements in it. But if you're writing in the future, I think you'd probably find it interesting.
I probably would, yeah.
Yeah. But especially if you write about serial killers, I think you're probably going to be okay with some of those.
Yes, I'm pretty okay. I'm usually all right with dark themes. Dark themes don't usually disturb me. I'm more worried about disturbing other people than I am about disturbing myself. There are some things that will get to me if I'm not careful. So, for example, one of the strange compulsions that I have is that I can't just like sit down on a toilet. Like I have to like look in the toilet. And I think that that's Stephen King's like it's fault,
Right.
because sometimes like the monster was in the toilet. But also like one time there was just this giant spider like underneath the toilet rim in my dad's house, and I was just like, oh man. So now I can never just like sit down. I have to do like a full toilet inspection, which can be annoying, because that's
Well,
like
you always
my
hear these crazy urban myths about like baby alligators and snakes.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I mean,
So
I'm sure that has probably happened somewhere at some point to somebody. But
right.
like I was born in Panama, Central America, and I spent a good chunk of my childhood down there. My dad was in the military,
Oh, okay.
and I saw some pretty like, for example, we'd go into the market, like the Panamanian market, and I used to like to pick up the bags of cereal, and all the bags they would put them in clear bags, and I would look and I would shake it up and look at the bottom, and then underneath in the bottom there was like these little roaches crawling around and stuff.
Oh God.
So
So basically what I'm hearing is your compulsion probably is you open a box of cereal, dump everything out, sort through it to make sure it's okay, and then put it back in the box before you have a bowl.
yeah,
Is that how
no,
you
my
go to?
exactly. No, my compulsion is as much as I hate the cold, I told Denise, I said, look, and I cannot live anywhere where there's roaches. I can't because I remember turning on the lights in my kitchen and having them
So
fly
basically you have
around.
to be in Pennsylvania or higher. You need
Right,
like
exactly.
maybe even just Canada. Like you just take your whole
I
farm
can't.
up
I got
to
to
there.
take into consideration that things are getting a little warmer, so we got to move a
Yeah,
little.
you might have to go like next time I talk to you, you'll be in like Nova Scotia.
Right.
You're like, well, we've moved the whole farm upwards. We brought the
Yeah,
chickens. We left the fruit trees, but I've got my Granny Smith trimmings.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother lived in Florida for a long time, and they had a banana tree, and he was telling me how great he thought it was, and then apparently there was a cockroach nest that developed in this banana tree, and they tried to get the banana, and there was just roaches everywhere. I'm like, no, I
Oh my
can't.
God.
I can't do
No,
it. I cannot do it. And I deal with bugs around here all the time, and it does not bother me, but
just the
roaches,
roaches.
yeah, I
Roaches get to
can't.
you.
I can't. So if you really want to get me if you want to add a horror
I'll write a
subgenre,
roach into my next
that's
story. It's
right.
gonna run across someone's foot or run up
Yeah,
their pant leg or
that's
something, so
right.
I can be like, "That's for you, Phil."
That's right. If there's a particular genre or maybe one or two that you really like to read, what would they be?
Oh, it really does depend. Kind of like music, I go through phases. I don't know
Okay.
how you are about your music listening, but like I'll be in the mood for something, so I'll listen to a lot of classical, and then like I'll be in the mood for Nine Inch Nails, so it'll be just Nine Inch Nails for like weeks, or then it's something really poppy. So my tastes change, and so I'll have a nonfiction cycle where I am this in this learning mood, so I'll just read a lot of nonfiction. I like to read about things like animal behavior or the environment or technology or something like that. Or then I'll move on to like a fiction phase, and but that's split up too. So it could be like classics. Like I really like Daphne de, it's French, so Daphne du Maurier maybe. And so she wrote her most famous novel is Rebecca, but she's got some other ones that are really good, like Frenchman's Creek.
Okay.
So some like old school literary, or then I'll do like horror, like not gore, like I'm not into like cut 'em up, hack 'em. I call them hack 'em ups, like just
Right.
like gore for the sake of gore. But I do
Yeah,
like a
like
good
horror
gore.
suspense, maybe.
Yeah. So I read, for example, Nick Cutter wrote a book called Troop or The Troop. I can't remember if it was Troop or The Troop, but that book was great. And it was terrifying. These four boys go camping on a remote island with their scout for uh it's like a Boy Scout thing, but it's not Boy Scouts because I think they're Canadian. But anyway, so they're on this remote island. There's no one out there but the four boys and the scout leader, and then this guy who is escaping something is goes to the island. And so from there it's just like you can imagine where that goes. But anyway,
Mhm.
and you probably is not what you're thinking. Whatever you're thinking is probably not actually what goes down, but
Well,
it
my
was a
thought
terrifying.
is like he shows up and he tries to act like he's their buddy, like hey, and then
No,
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 okay,
no. He's no, he's dead pretty early in the book, but he brought something to the island with him, and that's all I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
So,
Nice.
but anyway, so it's a really suspenseful, really horrifying, and it has a really nice end that's got this. I like horror novels that end on this kind of ominous note.
Right.
There's
Give you something to
resolution,
think
but
about.
not like total. Yeah, it's not total resolution. So that was good. And I also really loved Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Do you know her?
No, no.
She wrote a really popular YA fantasy series called Shadow and Bone. It was called the Grishaverse. It's basically about people with these special abilities. And then she wrote Six of Crows, which is basically a heist. It's if you boil it down, it's a heist novel. So that was really fascinating. But Ninth House is her first adult novel, and it's about this girl who used to be had a really hard life in LA, a drug addict and stuff, and she got recruited to go to Yale by these secret societies because they have a special job for her. And so the whole book is like her dealing with that. And magic is real. The secret societies can do magic, and they experiment in different things. And so that was a really interesting read. And Stephen King had a lot of praise for it, which is how I heard about it. But I mean, I already follow Leigh Bardugo because she's a really great writer. But yeah, so that was really interesting too.
I'm going to ask you this question, but nearly everybody has told me they don't like this question. I don't know why I keep asking it. But...
well, okay, thank you.
So that's a great way to preface the question.
Yeah, so now I'm like, oh God, what is it?
It's if you could pick one book to recommend to people out there listening, which one would you pick? Like, there's something.
Okay. So I'm like, now I know why they don't like the question.
Because it's hard to pick one.
It happened. Well, yeah, because my first question would always be, what is that person's genre? Like,
right. Or something that's like, hey, I just love this book, and
yeah, like, what is your favorite? Like, the first thing. So, for example, for you, I'd be like, well, what is your favorite book of all time?
Right.
And then you would probably have an answer. Do you have an answer?
Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. That would be my favorite book.
Oh, so see, I actually don't know that one. So what is that? It sounds like a pirate novel.
But Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy is actually it takes place in like the low country of South Carolina. So it's kind of like this Southern drama. And it's basically about this family secret that destroys their whole family later in life.
I guess if I had to answer for myself what I really like, there are two series that I think are really well done. One is the Cormorant Strike series, which is actually written by J.K. Rowling, but under the pseudonym Robert Galbraith.
Okay.
So she was trying to do it like on the sly, but I guess the wife of her lawyer like spilled the secret or whatever. It was like, do you know that J.K. Rowling writes these or whatever? And so then it was like all over the news because of course someone was like, what? So she had tried to launch a separate adult crime series. So there's no magic or anything in it. It's just a guy in London who is a veteran. He's missing a leg, and he now supports himself by running his detective agency. And he's just a really interesting guy, and he's got a great dynamic with the woman who eventually comes to be his like co-detective or I don't know exactly what his trainee maybe, because she wants to be a detective too. But anyway, their dynamic is great, and the series is really strong. It's really good writing. And so the Cormorant Strike series by Robert Galbraith, or the one I mentioned by Stephen King, the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, is also really good.
Well,
I
haven't read either of those, so I'll have to put them on my list. So.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah,
Would
so
you say it again,
I
please?
only, oh my God, my phone thought I was talking to her. Siri, we're not talking to robots today. So either of those, but I would only recommend them to people who like crime, so crime fiction. So if someone was like, oh, I only read romance, I would have a different answer for them. I would say, oh, well, you should check out The Kiss Quotient by Helen Wang, because that was a really great, or maybe it's Helen Wong. I don't actually know how to say her last name, Huang. But that was really great. She has autism herself, and her main character also has autism. So it's a really fascinating perspective about
so
what
since you read
like.
in all these different genres, you have a great book for everybody.
Yes, that's why I was like, what do you read? Tell me more about what you like.
By the way, did you read The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling?
I did. I didn't love it, mostly because it was like a slow, like town drama. I could see really liking it as a series, like a TV series, where it's
Right.
like everyone's little dramas are playing out on the
Right.
screen. But for reading, it moved a bit slowly for me.
Yeah. I actually really liked it.
Yeah. I mean, her writing is phenomenal, period. Like
Yeah, I
her
thought it was
writing is
really
really
good, and I was like, I went back and looked just to see what the reviews were like, and they were horrific. Did everybody want this to be Harry Potter? Like, I didn't
Yeah.
like Harry Potter. I didn't. I think I read the first one. That was it. But I don't read in that genre really. But I really liked her take, just the critique of sort of suburbia. I just find
Yeah.
hilarious. And I don't know if you have ever read Tom Perrotta,
Mm-mm. No.
but he wrote a couple of his books have been films that you would probably heard of. Little Children, and which was a Kate Winslet movie, and then there's Election, which was an old movie, like it was Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon, and but he does a really good job of critiquing suburbia, and
Okay.
just sort of like he takes the mundane and then does a really good job of sort of critiquing it without coming out and saying that he's critiquing it.
Right.
But I just find that stuff really funny. But anyway,
No, the only thing I've seen like that is like the Stepford Wives with
hmm
Nicole Kidman and Matthew Broderick. Did you see that one?
I saw the movie. I didn't read the book. I'm assuming there's a book, but I didn't.
Yes, I think there was a book.
Yeah, but yeah, like the Casual Vacancy, he gets horrific views too, reviews
No.
too.
Oh,
I'm like, I don't understand. I don't know what I'm thinking, but I
probably
noticed
people
that
in
some.
suburbia are like, don't talk about me and
I
my.
know. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kory. I really appreciate it. Where can people find out about you and your books?
Well, they can find me at my website, which is korymshrum.com, KorymShrum, and then also on Facebook at Kory M Shrum, or Twitter, which is just Kory Shrum.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for
Yeah.
listening to another episode of Your Next Great Novel. Be sure to subscribe. You can find the podcast at philwbooks.com and on iTunes, Stitcher, or TuneIn.